Sort of lost in all the media hype was that the Senate passed some important reforms. Talk about them and what they mean to the Senate and to New York.
Well, first of all, it is sad that the media seems to have missed the boat on these reforms. I mean, they're really historical reforms. The New York State Assembly and the Senate has not been operating under these principles since day one. But some of the important reforms are term limits on committee chairs, a real C-SPAN of New York, so that the general public can get educated about how our government really functions and how you can have contradicting opinions, different outlooks and perspectives other than what you get from the legislature and the governor. I mean, this is critical in a democracy, in my opinion. A lot of the reforms have to do with contribution to the budget process. By contribution, I mean input. Right now, the 3 men in the room is a real reality. The first time I went to Albany, I asked Joe Bruno, show me the room. And he took me in this room about half the size of this, about 12 by 15, and there's a little table and a couple of windows, and he said, this is where we do it. I said, this is where you do a $130 billion a year budget? And he says, this is where we do it. And and that's very important also to Western New York and upstate New York, because we've sort of been left out of this process. And when you got 3 leaders that are all from downstate, at least with Joe Bruno, we did have some representation.
But didn't this whole Senate standoff cost taxpayers money?
Well, that's sort of the common thinking, and sort of perpetuated again by the media. The senators are paid approximately $100,000 a year each, same with the assembly people. And they normally meet for 4 or 5 months, 2 or 3 days a week. Okay. What happened with the Senate, all that happened was that was extended out a couple of weeks, well, 5 or 6 weeks. They didn't get paid anymore. They still would have gotten paid the same amount of money. Just their activity level was pushed out 4 or 5 weeks. Now, did that cost the taxpayer anything? It probably did, because I think they paid per diem for staying overnight and that type of thing. But their salaries and so forth, they would have been paid anyway, so there was really no loss to the taxpayers. And when you weigh that financial cost against these reforms and their importance, and to have some resemblance of democracy happening in Albany, I mean, it was well worth it.
How do you respond to allegations brought forth by special interests that you bought the New York Senate?
Well, let's talk about special interest in buying legislatures. Let's talk about 3 of them. The first one I'd like to talk about is the New York State Teachers Union. Now, we all know teachers are a great bunch of people individually. It's a wonderful profession. It's very important to our quality of life. But the union itself is a different issue. First of all, there are several 100,000 members of the New York State Teachers Union. Their annual budget that they use to influence legislature and local school districts is $115 million a year. Think of that. Their payroll is over $50 million a year. They have representatives all over the state trying to influence the outcomes of budget elections and school board elections and pension plans and all of those things. The second largest special interest group is the Healthcare Workers Union 1199. They have several 100,000 members and have a huge annual budget. And third, our Civil Service Employee Union. State employees, there's over 200,000 of them, and they all have to pay dues into their unions. By the way, that's the interesting thing about the teachers union. It's mandatory if you work for the public school system, you join the union. Mandatory, and you must pay their dues level. Now, you take those 3 special interests alone and think of the power they have with hundreds of millions of dollars to influence the legislature, and they accuse us of being a special interest and we're guilty of something. It's really ridiculous.
Tom, there have been reports accusing you and Responsible New York of election fraud. Would you like to discuss those accusations?
Sure, Vic. It's a pleasure for me to discuss them, believe me, because the people of Buffalo have only been hearing one side of this, and we're going to use this as an opportunity to tell our side of the story. We supported a candidate, everybody knows him, Joe Macy. He was running against the wife of Dennis Ward, who's one of the Board of Election Commissioners. From almost the get-go, they were accusing us of coordinating our activities with Joe Macy, the candidate. And according to election law, a PAC like Responsible New York isn't allowed to do this. I mean, we can run media in support of the candidate, but we can't collaborate with the candidate, we can't talk to them, and we didn't, okay? But they kept accusing us of it, and of course when the wife of one of the commissioners, I think this is unusual, but anyway, what they did is they subpoenaed our bank records. Now, this is the County Board of Elections. These are state races. They have no jurisdiction to do that. And actually, the bank shouldn't have gone with it either, but they gave them our canceled checks from Responsible New York. Out of all the checks we wrote, I can tell you there were hundreds of them, and the total amount of money spent was over $4 million. There was one check that had on the front of it Joe Macy's name. Now, it was for some commercial on behalf of Responsible New York, supporting Joe Macy. It had nothing to do with Joe Macy's campaign. We did not collaborate with him on it. It was just a memo on the front of the check, Joe Macy. Well, they've been holding this check up for $3,000 saying, we're guilty of election fraud. Well, they took it to the Buffalo District Attorney, and the Buffalo District Attorney says, there's no case here. Now they've taken it to the Albany District Attorney. But what they've been able to do